right, good morning, Michaels. What is up, dude? How are we doing today?
Good morning. Good afternoon.
Happy holidays. We're getting so close to that Christmas time. There's still snow over there, Mr. Ross, or no?
No, it's gone. So unfortunately, the weekend would stay inside. But in Holland, we celebrate called Sinterklaas. It's kind of Santa Claus, but the Dutch version on the 5th of December. So we had some celebrations, nice family time. So it was good.
You get your nice little wooden clogs.
Not those. Well, you put in your shoe in front of the chimney actually, and then you're getting some surprises. So it's a pretty funny tradition. But he's leaving on the 6th of December, so he's gone, and now he's waiting for Santa Claus. So.
That's sick. I love it. Well, I'm gonna do a quick little shout out, and then we'll hit our intro song. Shout out to Hostfully, who is supporting this episode. It's kind of nice to see a new name on the show, so thank you guys. I'm gonna hit our morning intro, and then we're gonna go right into the Bidruption report because I know you got lots to say about the startup of the week and a few other little big Bidruption news. So I'm pumped.
Cool. Hi, I'm going to start with the startup of the week. This week I have a startup from the US. I met the guys in February. In February I went to San Francisco and to Silicon Valley. Also on this trip I visited the office of Airbnb where I was invited, but we'll talk about Airbnb in a second. Actually on the Plug and Play event where Bidruption was nominated and was attending, I met the guys from Troop Travel. Troop Travel actually is a company which actually they start solving a question, actually, where do we meet? So actually using millions of data points actually in location, carbon offset, security, visa requirements, and many, many more to find the best place for your meeting. So when I saw the presentation in there, I was impressed. So imagine you have a company which has offices in different places all over the world. They're actually suggesting a place where is the best to meet. So also looking at carbon offset, pricing, hotels, flights, they're using all those data points and they come with a solution. So it could be, for example, when you're a company, your headquarters in Amsterdam, you have offices in London, maybe an office in the US, they might suggest meet in Africa because there, if it all comes together, this makes most sense. Or it could be, for example, a complete different location. So it's pretty interesting what they built. They also raised some money, and they get a lot of awards. I think in the last year, I think they had over 10 awards, especially because they're disrupting the market. For sure, it's not easy now because they really focus on B2B. But I think if B2B comes back, and probably is close to half, let's expect like this, I think they can take a big chunk of the market because they're disrupting the way you're booking, the way you're searching. So big compliments to the guys. I had a nice talk with them in February. It was one of my last travels. And for sure, if B2B come back, for sure they will accelerate. Also, of course, there's so many events this week. I will attending two. On Wednesday, I've got a WTFL, the World Tourism Forum Lucerne meetup. It's about innovation. It's like a founder's talk. So together with Ross Atkins of BBC and two other founders, we have a nice discussion about the ingredients of being a founder, entrepreneurship. So it will be really nice session as well. I mentioned before, the World Tourism Forum was for us important. As in 2017, we won the award. And yeah, there will be nice discussion and founders talk. And on Friday, I'll be kind of a teacher again. I will just do a dialogue with some MBA students of the Hotel School The Hague. So they will ask questions about starting a company, about what is happening actually in your journey in starting a company, the ups and downs, the lows and heights. So I'm looking forward to teach the students again. I did it a few weeks ago for the hotel school, did for an innovation school in Berlin, and this week on Friday, hopefully can teach the guys from the hotel school The Hague something. So that's my Bidruption report for this week, and see you next week.
What a classic grandma. Wine and a donut for breakfast. This week, it's going to be tough to ignore the Airbnb IPO. It is what everybody's going to be talking about, and I'm sure most media will be consumed with this. The IPO has been long awaited for, and it's probably one of the most anticipated IPOs, not only of the year, but in a long, long time. And it's going to be a broader topic that we discuss today as a group, but in general, it's an interesting time for Airbnb to go public. It is short-term rentals have been the crown jewel of travel through Corona, but Corona has certainly still dampened a lot of numbers for almost every company that touches travel in the industry. And so we'll dive into a lot of the details a little bit further. But first, just one quick thing on the multiples that they're going out with. Will, if you can get that up. So Airbnb is going to be listing at just under a 10x multiple of revenue to valuation. And Booking is the only one that's going to be a little bit stronger than that. They're at about a 12x multiple. Expedia is only at a 3.5x multiple. I think there's an argument both ways that Airbnb can be more valuable or less valuable, just depending on your viewpoints and stance. But they haven't had the exposure to air travel, to hotels that the other two have. So there's certainly an argument that the valuation should be a little bit higher than their competitors in the short term. And we've all heard Airbnb talk about flights. They've talked about hotels in the past. They talked about it in the prospectus with the purchase of Hotel Tonight. So we know those are avenues they've explored and will likely continue to explore. But their multiple is certainly interesting compared to their direct competition, which is Booking and Expedia. And we'd love to get Michael and Will's input on the IPO this week. Have you guys heard of it yet? Has the news crossed your plate yet?
I heard something. No, it is interesting what's going to happen, right? You mentioned the multiplier. I'm really curious how the landscape will look in 10 years, right? You see, they do the comparison of the valuation compared with hotel chains, which has assets and etc. So I'm really, with all respect, and I just love what they did. Of course, they disrupt the market, but in the end, what they're owning is some servers with some great product on it running. And that's pretty it. And it's impressive. I met them. I went and I actually had a meeting with Sam Schenk of Hotels Tonight. Nice coffee in February. And we talk about the hotel business. And even in February, they were more concerned about us than about COVID that time. So it actually started. But it is interesting to look what is their growth potential, right? It's like the valuation now is set, which is a huge multiplier. I think now you see some accommodations, some apartments moving out of Airbnb and moving into midterm or long term because of COVID. And I'm actually, where is the growth? Is it what you mentioned? Is it extra verticals? Is it maybe they're gonna just investing in real estate, or they're gonna step away from this? I'm really curious what will be their growth or their future actually.
Yeah.
What do you think?
In their prospectus, they list a couple of growth paths. One is experiences, and it's long been known that Airbnb wants to own the entire trip. They haven't executed on it yet, but they've done piece by piece of hospitality and the actual rental side. They've added the experiences. So once you get to the city, now you have things to do. I remember the days that I would sign up for those free walking tours that people would put on in cities across Europe, and you tip them, 10 euros, and you have a really cool experience, and you meet people. Airbnb is monetizing that through the experiences, and I think it can work. It's probably a lot harder now with Corona than before, but they've brought a lot of those things online. Another area, Michael, that you mentioned was midterm and long-term stays, and Airbnb during COVID added, and Booking.com did as well, so they weren't the only ones, added a midterm or long-term stay capability. where now they're kind of in the boat with a Zillow, except on Zillow you can't one-click book or three-click books, as Airbnb likes to say. So, if they're tapping into just a tiny fraction of the mid and long-term housing stock, that's a huge potential for growth. And then the last piece is gaining more and more travelers. And Vrbo does a great job in the US of having a little bit older or family type of customer. Airbnb is known to have more of the millennial style customer. And I think, fast forwarding 10, 20 years, Airbnb is going to be a really strong brand that's going to be competitive. And Booking.com owns really the rest of the world. They're the global conglomerate. They certainly are the incumbent winner in travel everywhere outside of the US. And they've certainly publicly stated that the US is somewhere they want to be active in and competing as well. So I think it's good that Airbnb finally goes public, because a lot of their numbers will be listed, and we can all see exactly where everybody is. Listing counts, for example, last year there was a tit for tat with Booking.com where Airbnb has this many listings and Booking has this many listings and Airbnb has this many, and then Booking's like, okay, add in hotels and we have 25 million listings. So it was
growth there. If you look at listings, do you really think Airbnb can grow in the numbers of listings they have? Because if you have a property, you want to rent it out, it's you just add it already there, right? It just
yes and no. Because if you think about what trends really started during COVID was work from anywhere, not really having necessarily a home, but just a home base. And if you have a home, then and you just start to travel, now it's unlocking more inventory for the travelers to use or to be listed on not just Airbnb but all the platforms. So I do think listing count can increase. We'll see how many travelers continue to use short-term rentals when the vaccine is out and affected, and if those travelers were converted away from hotels and permanently to short-term rentals. I think we all know that's not necessarily the case. I use short-term rentals. I also use hotels. There's a time and place for both. And I'm sure, Michael, maybe you don't want to admit it, but you've probably used short-term rentals before too.
I still prefer hotels, but even though, of course, it's nice to just have this mix, right? I think it's healthy. I love to, if I just have to go for work somewhere, I prefer, of course, to stay in a hotel. But it's nice to combine a bit. It depends on the location where you're going. I'm still really curious when we talk about we see the regulations, right? I would say if you have a property and renting this out on Airbnb, I heard some nice discussion last week on a podcast somewhere else, and they had a discussion. Okay, it doesn't really make sense to keep it on an Airbnb because first I could rent it out 12 months in Amsterdam. Now I can only rent it out 1 month, so it doesn't really make sense to rent it out as an Airbnb or just go for long-term rent again. So I'm really curious if regulations actually could decrease the numbers of listings, because I don't see a lot of space left in increase. They might increase maybe listings when they're adding more hotels, but I think in really the vacation rental, really the short-term rental, apartments, etc., I'm not sure.
So the answer is yes, absolutely. And that article that Will's going to share highlights that they've struck deals or relationships with 70% of their top cities. So it's barely worked out from a regulatory standpoint. That being said, San Diego is a pretty large market. It is seemingly moving forward with a cap on licenses that's 50% what it is today. So yes, absolutely, it can go the other way. But if we also revisit our very first podcast on can a apart hotel brand exist, there is almost certainly going to be the rise of hotel licensed short-term rental properties that are 100% short-term rental. In cities like Amsterdam, where there's a cap on nights, honestly, that's really only good for Airbnb because no one can afford to rent out their flat full time and make enough for the year on 30 nights. But in other cities, I mean, France has a 120-day limit, I think. I know London has a 120-day limit. You can't really do it financially with that. But there's other ways in France, for example, if you convert an office into housing, then you can get full short-term rental permit. So there's some companies that have done that. In London, there's certain license types that if you get, then you can rent out full-time. So I think the next wave is on the legitimacy. And yes, there will be a decent number of churn from the single hosts that might be just renting out their second home. And that is a key core market for Airbnb. But they also recognize that the majority of their revenue comes from professionals. And now that they're going public, that's, you can care about this single host all you want. And they've set up funds for hosts to buy pre-IPO stock. And there's some really good stuff that they've done. But they're going to be reporting to Wall Street now, and Wall Street cares about revenue, and the revenue comes from pro hosts.
But if you talk about revenue, I'm really curious if you're looking at their revenue streams, like their business model, because it's focused on transactions. They charging the host and the booker, the guest. This is even not allowed in the Netherlands. So if you as a guest, you can ask your feedback because you can't earn on both sides because it's more like the real estate broker market, right? You can't earn on both sides. I'm really curious, like, are they going to keep similar business model? Or are they going into, I mentioned before, I'll not be surprised, in a bedroom business model, so like subscription based? I'll not be surprised. You would say if you really want to create loyalty, and if you're looking at valuation of SaaS models or subscription services are enormously. So it might be the case, okay, for the host, for example, we might keep a transaction or commission, but for the booker, for the guest, he doesn't pay any fees anymore. He pays, in this case, he pays a subscription. I'm also curious in this case, then you're avoiding maybe the issue what is there now, that you're earning on a transaction of both sides. In that case, you say, you get access to Airbnb, for example, and you're paying a subscription. On the other hand, they can still charge the host. I'm really curious if they will make a shift in business model to maintain or go into higher valuation because of, if you have a guest and he's paying subscription fee, you can do the multiplier, right? Which is great for valuation. So
true, but I mean, look, private industry is always 2 steps ahead of public regulations. So what happens in Amsterdam or Europe in general, where you can't charge both sides, you just charge one side more. Like it's going to be. It's pretty straightforward. They can keep the same percentage. They just charge one side more money.
Yeah.
And
go ahead. I was gonna say, as a host or like a property manager, I would like to see if they were to switch like that subscription model to like the host side or the management side, just because I think when you're going through, let's say you're a property manager of 10 properties or more, and you're going off of a commission base, but you bring in tons of revenue in general for all your property and your owners. That's like your one thing that really sucks, is like calculating your commission and your payouts and just seeing like, that percentage out the window versus where I would rather pay like, $59 a month fee or subscription or whatever it may be. Obviously, Airbnb hasn't been known for taking care of its hosts or property managers in the sense of like making sure that they're happy in order to keep putting properties on their platform. But this is something like Vrbo's done really well on, is just taking care of the property managers and taking care of the hosts and doing that stuff. So seeing where I think like long term where this might go and where it could go is if Airbnb really does want to make double revenue streams, guest and host, they would hopefully be smart enough to go in favor of the host on pricing. But we'll see. That's kind of my thoughts.
Yeah. I think,
but I'm just curious what will happen, right? They have to maintain the relationship. There will be newcomers coming within a few years. It will be difficult because they have, of course, a huge market share. But I'm curious if there will be new players in the market who might have a different business model They might have low commissions, or even though they're low commission, of course, you should be able to disrupt the market in a different way.
Yeah.
I'm curious how they want to keep their relationship, because as an apartment owner, you're just flexible. You can rent it out to 10 different booking platforms. If you don't care, it is waiting till the booking is coming. So it's not that you only have to give to one specific channel. So I'm curious how they're maintaining their relationship on long term with properties and the guest. I say it's an experience, but for the host, they just want to have the reservations by their bookings, and now they provide.
Yeah, there's a lot there. So how do they view the relationship long term? I think is probably different than how they view the relationship recently. People list where they're getting bookings, and Airbnb, especially in the US, drives a ton of bookings. And so hosts have just dealt with and put up with a lot of the crap that's been thrown their way. But what Airbnb's done that no other platform has tried to do is grab exclusive rights to inventory. And we saw it with what ended up crashing and burning from Nido, where they invested in a multifamily short-term rental operator company similar to what we discussed on our first episode. And they had 100% of the bookings. In fact, the tenants or residents of those buildings would be fine if they were listed anywhere else. So I think we could see all the platforms possibly being a little more aggressive towards exclusivity with them. Yeah. And then they can actually have unique inventory. And that's where you differentiate yourself, right? Right now, it's who gets the booking, and properties are more or less commoditized. And it's property managers' jobs to stand out and not be commoditized. And that's where there's a big book direct movement going on. Yeah. Hotels do a great job at getting a lot of direct bookings. Short-term rentals, it's really hard to, because you don't have a brand like Hilton or Marriott to drive traffic. So yeah, that's one. And then what's the other threat? And I'm surprised it hasn't been brought up yet, but there's another company in San Francisco that is a huge threat to Airbnb if they decided to go heavy into travel, or into Google. And even Facebook, who's really been dipping their toes into travel lately. I mean, I don't know if you guys went to the virtual Focusrite conference or not, but I mean, there's been Facebook people at Focusrite for the past handful of years. Google is a bit more of an enigma because of the whole monopoly thing. Their 3 largest customers in the world are Booking.com, Expedia, and Airbnb. And so it's a little bit murkier for them. Certainly going to be antitrust fights coming out if they jump in heavy into accommodations, but they're already in it, and they drive so much traffic. So I think the biggest threat for Airbnb is not some small company rising up out of nowhere, or even the book direct movement. I think it's Google maybe helping those book direct folks, or suppressing some of the big OTAs and raising the bar for smaller companies.
I think it's about the presentation, right? Why Booking was successful as well is that, of course, they make it really accessible to find a hotel, to read the right information. There were pictures, the same format. If you go to any booking website or like individual hotel, they all look the same. You all have to search, where can I find the information about location or pictures? I think, of course, what Airbnb did extremely well is, of course, because they all had the fear, like, okay, is it an apartment? How does it look like, right? They just don't have the trust, because in hotels has quality pictures. And then what they did well, of course, is, okay, we're making sure that the quality of the pictures are great. And I think that's, of course, what is Google missing. Of course, they can source a lot because they're king in sourcing information, but I think they're not allowed to even take the pictures, all of them from Airbnb. I think there they have the advantage. What I think Airbnb did extremely well, and I think that's maybe why they're in a position like this and worth, what is it, 40 billion or so, because they really step out by doing something which like doubled or tripled their business that time, is by presenting an apartment, right? They're presenting a short-term rental by have amazing pictures, make it personal with the host, making great information. I think that was their biggest advantage, because selling out a room was not impressive. It was out there, right? But the way they presented was really well done. And I think that's why they're so successful in what they did. So yes, you can have Google, for example, in reservations and in the hotel business and in short-term rental, but still the way of presenting information, comparing Airbnb about the property location and everything, compare with Google, not sure.
Google's basically become the meta site, right? The meta search, and meta search is largely faded away as a result. And it's also faded away a little bit as a result of people being very familiar with the brands Booking.com, Expedia, and Airbnb, right? Yeah. People have their favorites, they go to them directly, and that's that. But I think from a meta standpoint, most people start their search on Google.
100% Google. And I honestly, like, the one thing I see from the article that we were talking about when we're talking about all the other stocks for hotels like Marriott or Booking or Expedia or whatever, I honestly, like, the one thing that they have different is that hotel inventory compared to Airbnb. Yeah, they have hotels tonight, but that's not the biggest, OTA out there. It got a lot of buzz when it was purchased and acquired by Airbnb, but I don't think after that, I don't think I've ever gone on the platform again. Like, I went on it for a little bit and was like, oh, check this out. But at the end of the day, I think the one thing that we're going to have to, like, really, I'm hoping on is that, like, companies like Marriott will come in and just really, try to make sure that they control another segment of that, in the sense of making Airbnb realize that they need more than just vacation rentals. Vacation rentals are great, but Airbnb's overall, I just think, the 2020 year has been played out in an interesting way that I think it's kind of maybe going to just be a trend, for a while, and then eventually they're going to have to continue to find ways to innovate and get into the other game with everybody else.
That's actually a really, really good point. We saw over the weekend, Accor is jumping into short-term rentals a little bit heavier. Yeah, Fairmont's always kind of been in the luxury residential side. So now we've got Marriott, we've got Accor. IHG hasn't done anything yet. Hyatt has gone back and forth into it, but all the hotels are going to be into it, especially now that Marriott's kind of proven it can be successful. And those travelers, I mean, my dad would never travel and stay anywhere except a Marriott. He was amazingly brand loyal to them. And I'm sure he is the kind of person that would book a short-term rental through Marriott also. And hotels do own travelers. Delta owns me. I will only fly Delta. Like,
we know.
Everybody knows, but now I've
but I still think but I still think it's easier for a hotel to go into short-term rental because you have got this whole experience and how to deal with guests. I think opposite is much more difficult. So if you see to go from Marriott into short-term rental, turning into apartments, I don't think it's so difficult. I compare the opposite. You see also with Airbnb, when I was talking there, is if you're looking also at the connectivity space, right? It just, by having an apartment, there's one room and that's it. When you have an hotel, you've got 250 rooms and you just have completely different operations, and also the way of distribution, connectivity, etc. So I think that was like a hurdle what I spoke on with Airbnb and Sam Schenk in February, is like this connectivity part, actually. And that is something what is, well, in Bidruption we're investing a lot in this and build our own. But I think there's a huge difficulty, actually. And of course, they have the resources, or they should acquire us. But if you see, look, the resources the Airbnb has, they really have to invest a lot in connectivity if you want to go into the hotel space, which is much easier when you do the connectivity in the short-term rental space.
No, I wouldn't say it's easier. I'd say it's a lot easier to bring on 250 rooms that are the exact same than 250 properties that are all different. So
that's what you think. I think it's the same, but that's a difficulty because they all have some unique ingredients which you have to just mapping differently. We went to it, but if I think about it, I get a headache again. So maybe you should move to a different topic. But this room mapping and thinking of doing the same rooms, it's not the same rooms.
Operationally, Will, you've managed both sides. Like, what are some of the key differences, and like how would it affect Airbnb? Like, what challenges would they see moving from fragmented short-term rentals to like large blocks of hotels?
See, that's the thing. Like, I've onboarded vacation rentals into Airbnb and other platforms via software. Hostfully, for example, is a great one. But it's a lot more detail that goes into that listing because you're building it out on multiple channels versus when you're doing a hotel, when you're uploading it into pretty much the whole system. You have, like, if I had a 70, I'll just use my last hotel, for example, 70 unit all suite property, we have 5 different room types, and the only differences really were river view or mountain view. And then of course, 2 bedroom, 1 bedroom studio, etc. And so it's like there wasn't as much detail when you're building a listing though for like a short-term rental or like one property. There's so much more depth into explaining, like you're creating a journey for the guest in the sense, especially if you're not like doing direct, you're doing OTA listing exactly like Airbnb, Vrbo.
Because amenities aren't guaranteed, because there's no standardization, right? Like, when we travel, I don't know if there's going to be a iron that I can iron my shirt when I stay in a short-term rental. But in a hotel, like, you just assume that it's there.
Almost guarantee it.
And in terms of photographs, like the average hotel room has like 5 to 7 pictures of it in its listing, and the average short-term rental, for you to rank high on platforms like Vrbo, you have to have 20 plus.
Yeah.
And so it is, I think, and I've never been behind the scenes on hotels, Ross, but I think it's probably far more complex on the short-term rental side.
All right, well, we're gonna throw it out to the listeners, see what they say. Anyone who's listening, we got like 5 of you, 4 of you, going on right now. So you just tell us what you think, and we want to hear more because this is the fun. We have Golden and Salesforce going at it, and now we have Golden and Ross.
But if you go back to the hotel space, right? I'm not saying bad things about short-term rental because I just do like it a lot. But if you're looking at still renting out an apartment, which is just ready or having a hotel where you, operational wise, which you just have to take care of, like different kind of bookings, different room types, different rate plans. When you have also you have a reception downstairs, and then apartments get used to like self-check-in, make it easier. The host lives nearby. You have enough restaurant to run, breakfast and everything. There's the whole operational part in it. What I try to explain, moving from an apartment to an hotel or opposite. I think it's a huge difference, but it's still, when you look at connectivity, and that's like, we can spend a whole episode on this one, is like this connectivity in general, I think, is so fragmented and difficult, and no standards and etc. And I think that's make it difficult sometimes to enter the whole hotel space. I had some discussions also with channel managers a few days ago, and they even agreed, like, yes, we try to keep it difficult to move to different channel managers because otherwise they're moving out. So I think when the space, and it's pretty, if you're looking at think about short-term rental, you think about Airbnb. People call it, I'm staying in an Airbnb, even though they didn't book an Airbnb, they call it an Airbnb. You don't want to call it, I stayed in a booking.com. If I just think about it, I would just get sad. Okay, my ways of thinking about booking, but it is, you're staying in a marriage, you're staying in a hotel, whatever. Airbnb getting also, and that's why it really helped them, I think, in building the name awareness, is like, you're calling a short-term rental, you just call it an Airbnb, right? So I think that helped them a lot in the whole brand awareness. But what you should do, Fons, by the way, if one of you just look back at one of the first pitch decks, actually. I just found them some time ago, how it looked like. It was impressive to see, like, really, what was it, Airbed and breakfast, whatever. It was so long, and you see their styling, their branding. And it's amazing to see still, and well done by the guys to see how they started with renting out an air mattress to a company now which is valued over 40 billion. So yeah, again, I'm really curious what it will be if we have the same talk in 10 years around Christmas time at 2030. What will be their evaluation then?
I was gonna say what you talk about, like taking control, like of the listen. Like people say, I book on Air, or I have an Airbnb, or I'm booking an Airbnb or staying at Airbnb or whatever the term is. This is like the one thing that we preach to like clients and friends, and like even my parents. Like I've been preaching this like into their head since day one. They're like, oh, our Airbnb this, our Airbnb that. It's like, well, no, it's not your Airbnb. It's your property on Airbnb. We have to tell them that all the time. And I think I'm glad Airbnb did what they did in the beginning of 2020 with the full refund cancellation, because it woke a lot of people up in that sense. And we've talked about this before. I feel like all our episodes from episode 1 and all the way to now have all connected somehow. But it's just the taking back control of the booking and really focusing on branding. Like that's the one thing hotels have really done well, and vacation rentals, as we shift from host to property manager and the professionalization side of things, I think we're going to see that shift as well. Go with that whole mindset and taking back control. So yeah, awesome. Well, I think that is a good way to cut it off. I'm going to leave a final question. Shout out to the listeners and followers I've been watching. We had a pretty good interaction this morning. So I guess in the comments, if you're watching the live or the replay, I want to hear, where do you stay when you travel? Is it a hotel or vacation rental pre-COVID? What is it now during COVID? And what do you expect to stay after? You can answer one of those 3, and we would love to hear your thoughts and see what you guys are doing. And I'll let you two take it away. Do you have any final thoughts or conclusions for the episode?
I'm curious, actually, because Airbnb started in 2008, right? They started in a crisis. Well, I think all of us can confirm that we have kind of a crisis now. So I'm really curious, actually, what people think, and they can also leave in the comments what they think it will be. This called the new Airbnb. So in a year of 12 or so from now, which could actually become quite big now. And of course, you can now mention Bidroom, it's fine. But if you have a different one in mind, feel free to share as well. I'm really curious because they started disrupting a market really in a crisis. Now we have, I don't want to call it a similar situation, but yeah, we do have a crisis now. I'm really curious what kind of other initiative, kind of business models, kind of things will appear now in travel. Maybe if one of you know one, feel free, because I could mention them as a startup of the week. But I'm really curious if we have the same conversation. I mentioned 10 years, which will be the new one.
100%.
And I'm excited for our conversation next week that we'll be able to recap what the IPO actually did. So see what the outside full public markets can tell us.
100%.
You think more or less than 40 billion next week?
More
than 50?
I think there's going to be a nice retail pop, and then how much it balances out after that, I am no expert, but I can almost certainly say after the listing, it'll definitely pop. Yeah,
I give it maybe 24 to 48 hours, and then maybe a little dip, maybe less.
I'm no expert trader, so I'll leave my stock tips at that.
Yeah, we just put a disclaimer on the episode. We are not professional stock traders or day traders. So.
Advice because just make sure before we get lost.
We're not giving anybody any financial advice. Do not listen to us.
Exactly. Well, thank you guys. We'll see all the listeners and viewers that we had this morning and the people watching on the replay next week. And we're going to talk about, obviously, the IPO and how it did. So thank you guys for tuning in, and we are super pumped.